Welcome everybody. Happy to have you here. My name is Nicole Hunter. I am proud to be your host of this session of our Navigating Chaos Communication Strategies for Uncertain Times. This is our sixth and final session. Whether this is your first or sixth time joining us, we're happy to have you here. This webinar is brought to you by Buoy 231 Consulting, Mightybytes, and Mangrove. Today, we will be discussing design practices, more specifically, how they fit into the overall picture of how to build competent communication strategies, common pitfalls, and how we can use design as a tool of resistance. But first, we will go on to some housekeeping. So first off, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Tim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Tim Frick from Mightybytes, and we're with Jen here. We hatched this idea post 2024 election on putting together a webinar series to help people that we work with and stakeholders within our organizations to improve communications and kind of navigate the dual challenges that are going on right now of technological disruption and political chaos. And so happy to be here and excited for all of you to hear all of your thoughts and stuff on this. And Jen, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, and I'm Jennifer Caddick. I'm Buoy 231 Consulting. I support organizations with their advocacy communications, so to help you get out the word and manage some of this political chaos that's happening in your communities today. I'm in very far upstate New York on the Canadian border. Yeah, this has been a really fun series. I have to say the world around us is not very fun, but the conversations we've had have been really helpful and illuminating as we try to grapple with everything that's happening. And I'm really excited for our conversation today with Andrew. So Andrew, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Boardman. I work at Mangrove Web as creative director, and Mangrove is a certified B Corp and a woman-owned business focusing on organizations driving really transformational change. And I'm really delighted and excited to be here with all of you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Andrew.
Thanks so much. We can move on to the next slide.
Sure.
All right, so here's today's agenda outlining the high-level topics we'll be covering. First, we'll talk about the value of design, then the design process, and finally, designing for resistance. Conversation will take about 30 to 45 minutes, and we'll save the last 15 for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat or use Zoom's Candy Q&A feature. I will be monitoring both. And all right.
Go ahead, Nicole. Did you want to cover the past webinars, or would you like us to, Jen and I, to tag team them?
Go ahead and tag team them.
Go ahead, Jen. You want to take the first one?
Yeah, I'll start. And I think Nicole or Tim are going to drop some of the links to these in the chat, but because we have all the videos on YouTube in case you missed them. But our first conversation was with the fantastic Jill Pollack. We got an amazing masterclass in storytelling and a great conversation thinking about how organizations can use stories, particularly as all of this chaos, both technological and political, is swirling around us, and how stories can really help organizations break through with their messaging to the important audiences that they need to reach. So definitely check that out if you weren't able to join it. Tim, do you want to do the next one?
Sure. Similarly, and to Jen's point, we were, for the first couple webinars, we really wanted to focus on kind of like foundational components that every organization should have solid and down, because it's those foundational components that are going to help your organization be more stable when it comes to uncertainty and chaos and all that kind of stuff. So our second webinar, we talked about resilient communication strategies. We had Bridget Heyman from Access Living. We had a really great talk about discussing creating inclusive and more resilient communications, as well as how to withstand turbulent times in the midst of all of this. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, and then our next conversation was with Kellen Moody, and we talked about community. We all know that we can't do this work by ourselves. We need to be working with others, either as a community or as more formal coalitions. And so we had a great conversation about how one might structure communities and coalitions, what strengthens them, what weakens them, and how to think about managing that kind of networking in the midst of everything else. So you're dealing with your own personal lives, your business lives, and then also figuring out how to manage community and coalition. That was such a great conversation. Lots of really helpful ideas and tips there from Cal.
Yeah, and many of which will be very relevant to today's conversation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a lot
Yeah.
of the topic of coalition building and community building will come up repeatedly in our conversation today. In our last webinar, or the most recent webinar that we had, sorry, the fourth webinar, the most recent one was actually a community building event. Jennifer Sconyers shared how to foster more dynamic teams through inclusion, innovation, and organizational agility. And we really talked a lot about how inclusion can drive more effective and dynamic teams. And how to use things like organizational agility and innovation to pivot when needed and to understand how to, make your teams more and your communications more resilient overall. I'll just quickly run through this one too. We didn't record the community collaboration. We did have a great conversation about it. We talked about group one. We broke into two groups. For group one was focused on technological disruption, and I'll let Jen talk about group two. The first one on technological disruption, we almost spent the entire time talking about AI. It seemed to be the topic that most folks in the group wanted to dig into. We talked about challenges with ethics, privacy, and sustainability issues, when to use and not use AI, what it's good for, what it's not good for, and then crafting good, solid organizational policies around responsible use of AI. And Jen, you want to talk about what group two discussed?
Yeah, we focused on communication strategies in the midst of a lot of political chaos. One of the parts of the conversation was the challenge of knowing when to speak up and when not to, either as a business or a nonprofit organization, especially in this just flood of news that may be impacting our organization or the communities that we work with and our various stakeholder groups. And so we sort of grappled with that issue quite a bit. And we also talked about the working in coalition and the importance of understanding your role and recognizing that different entities can play different roles because of who they are. So one person gave an example of like being a foundation, having some government groups involved, having some grassroots groups, and that each of them were bringing different skills and expertise and capacities to those conversations and being comfortable allowing groups to step forward and step back when necessary. So it was a great conversation.
Great, thanks, Jen. I'm going to volley this next slide over to Andrew because it is May Day, also known as International Workers' Day. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so hi everyone. When we started talking a little bit about this this event today, we thought, oh, May 1st would be a really good day to do this because around the world, maybe not so much in Canada and the United States where most of us are, around the world, this is a really big day for international workers. It is a day that really commemorates and celebrates the working class and the people that actually do a lot of the hard, really difficult work that makes our lives, really, really sound. And so the idea of May Day is really about collective power, defending people's rights, demanding equity and economic justice. And I think it's important that we kind of just commemorate and celebrate this day. And to remember, just as a kind of framing device, I thought it'd be interesting just to talk about design as a radical act. And maybe in this next slide, we can just see how design has really impacted not only collective action, but advocacy, the hard work that people do in the streets every single day, well, hopefully every single day in the future, and around collective action, around protests. Design is that thing that really can rejuvenate movements. It's the thing that can bring people together. It is a communications tool. And if you go to the next slide, it can be a really radical act. And this is a slide from 1968 from a worker strike in Memphis of garbage workers. These were all predominantly Black men who went on strike, and they had these amazing signs that they were given by a union. And if on the next, just click one more, you can just see how beautiful, how simple, and how powerful that poster is. This is a slate. This is a variant of the poster that they were all holding. And this is like a lot of artists, a lot of designers have used this simplicity and this act to radically communicate a proposition and hope. So I want to just leave that there and just how powerful design is and can be.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Andrew, and thank you very much for reminding us to open with this, because it's a really great and powerful way to talk about the role of design in the act of resistance. So thanks very much. We're going to move on to our first question, and that's really about understanding the value of good design, specifically how might communications leaders use design to improve their organizations, help them better navigate chaos, whether that chaos is political or otherwise. So first question we'll kind of throw out is, what is design good for? When is it not? When is design good, and when is it not the right solution?
I guess that's me.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, when is design good for? I mean, I'm biased here, so I'm going to come at this from a very, very biased standpoint as both a designer and creative director and someone who's like thought and lived design for a long, long time. But my personal bias is design is good for almost everything. If you're not noticing design, that's probably a good thing. If you are noticing design in certain contexts, it can be an amazing thing. And we could talk about this a little bit on this next slide after we get through a few more points. But I think in general, design proves its value over and over again, and good design proves its value uh, exponentially. It's not right for every single time. It's not right for every single engagement, but in general, I feel like design outweighs the benefits um, uh, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah. And one of the questions that kept coming up when we were prepping for this webinar was what can be designed within organizations. There are different design disciplines. I mean, if you're at an architecture firm, you have a specific kind of design discipline there. But there's, in recent years, product design has really exploded. Organizational design has come into the mix. And so there's all kinds of different flavors of design. And so, we're really specifically focusing on design as a communications tool for this webinar, but it's worth acknowledging that, design processes and practices can be used to drive all kinds of innovation within organizations, and that it should be embraced from team to team, whether you're in finance or operations or anything like that. And it may seem like a weird statement to see, like, I'm going to design my finances, but the reality is it's happening, and it works, and it's very it's a beautiful thing. I don't know if Andrew, if you had anything you wanted to add to that, or if you just want to go right on to this next slide about the business value of design.
I just want to add that, I think when you're thinking about design for usability or for a website or for a digital product or campaign, what I always want to emphasize is if you're going to use design, make sure it's worth um, think of it as a long-term investment. If you're just designing for keeping your organization alive for the next 6 months, you're going to have to really make some tough decisions. And I know there are a lot of organizations out there in that boat specifically today. But if you're thinking over 2, 3, 4 years, the investment in design in your digital product, in your organization, in your branding, those long-term payoffs will almost always happen.
Right. And to that end, Jen, as someone who hires designers, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Andrew, you hit on what I was going to say design isn't just sort of a short-term quick fix. It's a way to help you think about and think creatively about some of your longer term needs and solutions. So when I think about it in, say, an advocacy campaign, you kind of have to have some sense of where you want to go, what your big picture values are, what your big picture goals are, and design can be a way to help you move through that process and think creatively about that. And so I think that idea that it's thinking of design as a long-term investment, I think is really important. It isn't just necessarily designing a fact sheet or a one page on your website or a logo. It's part of that broader vision for your organization or campaign.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of times that the designer is brought in at the end, or when someone says, "Oh, well, we need a logo for that," and that oftentimes undermines a lot of the efficacy of a lot of design projects as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think a lot of folks right now are thinking about the current administration in terms of a 4-year construct. We have 4 years to kind of,
Right.
work on this. So I hope that organizations in here that are listening have the tenacity and the capacity to kind of think at least in that 4-year block.
Mhm.
Right. Andrew, do you want to talk a little bit about the McKinsey report?
Yeah, so really briefly, this is 7 years ago, so it's a little bit dated, pre-pandemic. But McKinsey looked at companies, and I know a lot of folks here don't belong to companies, but looked at like large Fortune 500 companies, 300 publicly listed companies, and they created this McKinsey design kind of index. But they found that the folks that invested in design either doubled or even tripled their revenue and or their returns to shareholders. So if we think about it in terms of advocacy and organizations, we can think about potentially design. I haven't done this research, but potentially design could impact your stakeholders, the engagement with stakeholders, and also potentially donations, fundraising, and other things. And I'm sure there's a map, but I haven't done that research yet.
Yeah, no, well, and we both work at B Corps, right? And B
Sure.
Corps are all about like finding, tangible returns and tangible value and shared value and for the stakeholders of our organizations, whether that's communities or ecosystems or partners or teams or whatever. There's definitely we're all looking at this, and I see a graph like this one, and I'm like, okay, that's great that they were able to return money to shareholders. But in my world, most of that money gets reinvested back into the stakeholder ecosystem of the business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Tim, I'm glad you said that, because I'll be honest, Andrew, the first time I skimmed through when you were creating these slides, I thought that said total returns to stakeholders. And it wasn't until the second or third time I looked at the slide, I was like, oh, this is McKinsey. They're talking about
Right, they're
shareholders,
talking
right?
about money.
They're talking about
Yeah.
money. But I have a hunch, if you could figure out how to measure it, it'd probably be that a similar kind of graph for returns to stakeholders. You want to think of it from like the NGO perspective of like how, especially thinking of like visual design or program design, if your people that you need to connect with are able to engage with your concepts or your materials or your programs in a way that works for them and works with them, you're going to have a return on whatever you want to call your investment, right? More people involved or more people aware or so on. So anyways, it's funny. I thought that said returns to stakeholders.
All right, well, should we move on? And Nicole, I'll let you take the lead on this next one.
Sure. So next topic, we'll be talking about building trust and transparency in the design process. So the first kind of element of this is kind of dealing with the inherent uncertainty uh, of the design process. So the question is, how do you get around that? I think that Tim or Andrew have a lot of things to say about that, so
I'll let you go first, Andrew.
yeah, we'll give Andrew the privilege.
Um, okay, sure. I mean, Tim and I both have a lot of experience with RFPs. We have both responded to RFPs and not responded to RFPs. I just want to mention RFPs as being, from my point of view, a disaster that's kind of been written upon the entire industry. RFPs are like a waste of human life, as far as I'm concerned, and a waste of just general time, right? Like we were inundated with these RFPs, and we spend, as agencies, as organizations, as governments, we just spend way too much time thinking about them, adapting to them, writing proposals. So I'm just going to make a quick case. If you need a designer, or you need design, or you need development, find those two or three like amazing designers and design organizations or agencies. Find those places that really resonate with you. Ask for references and colleagues' advice, but then just focus on those two or three. I just want to put that out there. It's such a breath of fresh air when folks do that.
Yeah. We wrote a resource guide specifically that talks about why and how RFPs are not a sustainable business practice, and even though many organizations still do them, the unfortunate side to it for the organizations that issue them is that there's a lot of really good, really talented design teams and design firms out there that just won't respond to them. In Mightybytes case, I would say probably 90% of the time we'll turn it down if it's an RFP. You know, the rare exception is when we, you know, tend to know the folks who are issuing the RFP, or they're acknowledging upfront that it's a organizational red tape bureaucracy thing that they have to go through, but that they're, you know, that they're only looking at a small number of groups. But it just, you know, that beyond undermining trust and transparency, and undermining good collaboration, and potentially setting up projects, especially large projects and large tech projects, for failure right from the get-go, not setting up relationships based on trust and transparency, as we said at the beginning of this section. I think there's so many reasons and rationale for moving away from RFPs. And there's, you know, qualifications-based selection. There are a bunch of different alternatives out there that you can, you know, focus on that don't require using an RFP. And it doesn't mean, you know, to Andrew's point, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't vet your vendors. You absolutely, totally, completely should. The idea is that, you know, most people who issue an RFP is that they're, you know, trying to reduce risk, and that's all well and good, and that's all, you know, kind of, but the reality is that the RFP process itself sets up an organization for more risk when you have to, you know, kind of stick to these very, very firm constraints, and you know, which again often set up a project for failure. So I'm with you, Andrew, that it is not a practice that we should be thinking, especially if we're trying to redesign an economy that works for everyone. RFPs tend to be inequitable, and so I think, you know, there are better ways to go about it, and you know, I would encourage anybody to look at that. With that being said, as someone who's answered RFPs for Jen on this call, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Jen.
Yeah, look, you know, Tim, you and I have talked about this so much over the years, and I understand philosophically, you know, that
Right.
RFPs are a struggle. And now that I'm a consultant myself, I'm yep, feel it. Also, but being in-house, you know, some of it is, you know, there is a reality that some organizations, like, it's part of their policy, like it's a
Right.
part of their, you know,
For
the
sure.
board
Yep.
has set financial policies, and you have to, for certain things, put out an RFP. One thing I've tried to think about is, like, setting out, instead of an RFP that is super prescriptive, right? You know, that says we shall have a project that has this kind of thing and this kind of thing and this kind of thing, reframing them, or thinking of it as a request for information, right? Or request for
Right.
qualifications. You know, like, here are our goals, here are the problems that we are facing, and how might your firm go about addressing those? Like, what is your process? How would you help us solve these problems together? And, you know, I've found those conversations to be much richer. And I've found the information I've gotten from those, as somebody who's looking for a vendor, to be a little bit easier to compare, right? Because if you're putting out an RFP with a lot of detailed specifics, people are going to interpret that in different ways, actually, even though it sounds like you might get a more specific answer. But if you're comparing, like, how does a company work? How are they going to help be your partner through this project? I found that that's a little more easier to compare when selecting a vendor. So that's my
Yeah.
pitch for switching away from an RFP. Yeah,
For
Andrew, I know
sure.
you want to weigh in there.
Can I underline
Yeah.
that word, Jennifer? Partner, really what you're looking for. Like, this isn't like, if you're looking for a vendor, you're probably in the wrong space, right? Like, for as a communications professional, you really want that partner who can challenge you, who can work with you, who will be kind to you, who will also think for you, who will be there for you and support you. If you think about it purely as a vendor, or someone who's just going to deliver goods, like, I don't know, like a SaaS or something like that, it's just not, you're not going to be set up for long-term success. And yeah, partnership, that's
Yeah.
really.
And it's worth acknowledging here that the reason that it might seem kind of weird that we're talking about RFPs as part of a design conversation, but it is worth noting that, you know, most design work is contracted oftentimes through an RFP.
Yeah.
And so that's just, you know, making sure that I bring that up there. That's part of the process. So designers typically are more than used to this process. On that note, let's move on to the next session, because I think it's a really good, you know, what Jen was saying is a really good segue into talking about, you know, themes and questions around the design process, and whether or not there is a one size fits all approach to anything. And Andrew, go ahead and give this one your best shot, because I know you have strong feelings
Yeah.
here.
I mean, there is a design process, and I think it's fairly well established across all kind of fields of design and areas of endeavor in the design world. But it always starts with discovery. Like, I think discovery is where it all begins. And I think, Tim, you and I have a little bit different approaches, both as as business folks and also as kind of thinkers about this. But starting with discovery is really important. And here's what I want to say is, like, if you just find a design firm or an agency or communications firm and you just want to do discovery, there's nothing wrong with that. Like,
Right.
just do discovery, just help them figure out what your questions are and make sure that you're solving the right problem, not necessarily the problem that your board is bringing you to, or that I don't know, your neighbor is bringing up. It's really important to address the right problem, and discovery will unveil that pretty
Yeah,
well.
yeah, we separate our discovery process out from the rest of of a project. We do it as a separate engagement. We do it right up front. And so that way, again, if a client goes through the process and realizes that they don't have the right problem and they're looking to go back to the drawing board, or maybe it's not a good fit, you go through the discovery process and you realize, oh, this is not quite this is not the kind of thing that I'm looking for, or whatever. We give our clients an out. And 90% of the time when we go through the discovery process, most of our clients are like, oh yeah, cool, I totally get why we did this. And it gives me such a better understanding of what it is that we're trying to do than I had at the beginning of the process. But every now and again, we just had it happen not too long ago, where a client says, you know what, this is not, we're going to go in a different direction. We learned a lot. And with the stuff that we went through in the design process, or excuse me, the discovery process, was very valuable. But the more important thing is we didn't try to do all of that work shoehorned into an RFP process. We did it as a separate engagement that we got paid for, that we put a lot of effort and work and energy into, with the idea of that collaboration builds trust, it builds transparency, and all of these kind of things. And so, like I said, most of our clients go through the process and are like, oh yeah, okay, I totally get that now.
Yeah, I love that.
And that, I'll give a specific example of how that discovery process kind of pays off, right? So Tim and I are working on a project together. I'm supporting an organization that needs to do a complete overhaul of all of their technology, their website, their database, and so on. And they were fortunate they had a funder that paid for that discovery process. Like, they believe in this approach, right? Like, spend time really getting clear about what your problems are and thinking about some creative ways to possibly solve those before you reach an implementation phase. And now that organization is the implementation phase, and they keep looking around and going like, this is kind of, easy is not the right word, but it's smooth, right? Because you've been so clear about what your problems are, what some potential approaches to those problems are. And so you're not in the middle of building something and going like, oh, shoot, we forgot about this, or we didn't think about that. So it really does, I think, literally pay off, both in limiting headaches and problems and surprises. But everybody is on the same page, and you are so much more clear going into your project when you're actually building or creating the final product, if that makes sense.
And to both of your points, it allows you to test the partnership.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if this isn't good, okay, you can walk away and go to another agency, or just call it quits, and you saved yourself $10,000,
Mm-hmm.
$50,000, whatever, right?
Yeah, great
Yeah,
point.
and it does help you, we're going to get explicit about this later in the conversation, but it does really help you also define collectively for project stakeholders what success looks like, and what are the metrics and
Mm,
KPIs you're going to use to track that success, and helps you kind of, as for us as an agency, helps us kind of foster this idea of a growth mindset and a continuous learning mindset, wherein we don't have all the answers up front, and even after a discovery process, typically don't have all the answers, but we have a lot of them, and we have a really good solid way to proceed. And again, mentioned earlier, RFPs are usually to address uncertainty, and there's always uncertainty in a project, but you now, after going through a discovery process like this, to Jen's point, you have you don't know all the answers, but you know a lot of them, and you know how to proceed, and you're able to kind of go forward hand in hand, in that partnership kind of
mm-hmm.
arrangement that Andrew was mentioning, to tackle the other things that you're not quite sure of.
I should just mention this is the double diamond discovery process that the UK Design Council came up with in 2003. So
Yeah.
a little long ago, but it's still relevant and useful, and people have been updating it and iterating on it, and it's just one model among many.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you mentioned to me earlier, Andrew, that like one of the shortcomings of this is that it doesn't talk about continuous learning and improvement, that it's really about delivery, and it stops at kind of the outcome versus the or output versus the outcome.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I think we have maybe a slide later, Tim,
yep,
about
yeah,
this
yeah.
too. Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
All right, let's talk about the fun stuff.
Woo.
Let's
Okay.
talk about resistance and designing for resistance.
Yeah, this is where the rubber hits the road. I think you know, we're in kind of tough times, right? Like I think across the road, across the world, we're kind of seeing that, design is going to be increasingly employed and deployed against us. And also we're going to need to deploy it for us, for people. So I think keeping that mindset, knowing that design can go both ways, right, is really, really important. And I think what I'd say is keeping design in mind as you think about whatever it is you need to develop in order to develop resistance is really important. Don't think about implementation until you've really thought about design. That's real broad strokes. And then lastly, I would just say think big picture about what it is again and implement in small iterative
Yeah,
ways.
yeah, yep, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Jen, I would really love to hear from your perspective on this in terms of like, there's a lot of social enterprises, conscious companies, B Corps, et cetera, that are just kind of dipping their, not just, they're not dipping their toe into design, that a lot of them have very established design practices and stuff, but they are just dipping their toe into political advocacy and for the first time and stuff. And so my question to you is, what can social enterprises or B Corps or conscious companies learn from nonprofits and advocacy organizations in terms of like designing for
Mm.
resistance?
Yeah, that's a giant question.
Good
You know,
thing we got a few minutes left.
you're right. One thing, actually, I'm going to give an example of a B Corp because I saw it yesterday on actually LinkedIn, and I was like, oh, this is such an amazing example of a B Corp, on the business side, engaging in advocacy. And one of my big hobbies is baking. I love to bake, and so I'm a big fan of King Arthur Baking.
Oh
People
yeah.
know them because they make flour. They're a great B Corp. They're a wonderful company. They make lots of other things besides flour. And so I, of course, followed all their social media stuff, but um, one of their values, and I'm not sure I'm going to articulate it properly, but is like that everybody should have access to good, wholesome food, right? And we should be able to cook together, and the community that happens around food, but also access to food. That is a fundamental right. And they talk about that in all different kinds of ways. And I saw yesterday they did some posts. Apparently, yesterday was a national lobby day or advocacy day around SNAP, which is the food assistance programs in the US. Some people call it food stamps. And so there was apparently some sort of national advocacy day asking people to call Congress in support of funding these food assistance programs. And because it's so, this idea that everyone should have access to healthy food is so ingrained in everything King Arthur talks about, that when I saw that post on like, hey, support SNAP Advocacy Day, and here's what you can do, it felt like such a natural thing for them. It wasn't like, bah, 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 we are doing advocacy now. It was just a continuation of their values. And I thought that was such a great example. And so I guess my specific answer to your question, Tim, is for companies that are beginning to really engage on advocacy, is thinking about how it connects with your organization's values and how you can talk about it through all of those, through all the different ways that you're talking about your product or your services. That advocacy isn't just a standalone thing that you might do around an election or around an advocacy day, or if there's a bill that your organization thinks should be passed. So it has to be ingrained in your values and how you talk about what you do. And then when it comes time to make a specific advocacy ask, like, hey, call your legislators to support SNAP on this advocacy day, it's like, oh, of course they would be talking about that.
Right.
Does that help? Does that answer your
It
question?
absolutely resonates. The example from Mightybytes is that we focus a lot on ethics in tech and responsible tech and sustainability in tech and stuff like that. And so that, when the opportunity comes to promote, responsible tech standards and that kind of thing, or even advocacy for better standards and regulations and that kind of thing. It becomes a natural part of our conversation and part of our communications and just kind of who we are. It's expected and not a surprise and doesn't feel like greenwashing and that kind of stuff. And so that's our own personal example, but I know that every B Corp has one. I know Mangrove has multiple examples of that, and one of them is accessibility. And I think it's a great segue to go right into this slide and talk a little bit, Andrew, talk a little bit about the resistance action of making something accessible and sustainable.
Yeah, and I think some of those examples you list here are like very overt, right? Like we're gonna promote or help an organization or help a cause, but there's also things that are not quite covert, but at least under the covers a little bit. And one of those things that you can do is just really both. It's like it's driven both by empathy and a radical act is to make everything that you do, if possible, accessible to everybody. Like the web. I firmly believe this. The web has been and continues to be built for every single person on the planet. It's this incredible platform that will get information out immediately to anyone, anytime. And it's always easy to forget that there's about 15% of the world, sometimes more, that have a real tough time accessing information. And so creating your website, creating your social media, creating your like digital campaigns so that they're fully accessible to everybody, it's incredibly powerful. And we've got a long ways to go, even though the web it's been around for 30 years.
Yeah, and isn't it the WebAIM project that came out this year said something like 96% of all web pages tested still had some level of accessibility issue, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, on the flip side, on the encouraging note, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is going to be being more explicit starting, I believe, next year. There's a European Accessibility Act that is coming into play this year, and that there's going to be more very specific guidance around that. The new B Corp standards not only require political advocacy and government engagement, but they also require accessible websites. So if you move forward in the new standards, you have to, and you want to be a B Corp, you have to have an accessible website and you have to do some sort of government advocacy work. For us, it's going to be web standards around sustainability, but like every organization or every B Corp is going to have a different take and a different, thing. King Arthur Flour, for example, is probably going to have, advocacy work around, safe food as Jen mentioned and stuff.
And I'll just mention from a design perspective, design doesn't need to be sacrificed just because your site is accessible. There may be certain things you can't do or won't do, but you'll still have a fantastic design by thinking about an accessible experience for everybody.
Yeah, we revamped the Access Living. Bridget Heyman, who was our guest for webinar 2, our goal for the website redesign that we did for them was can we get to AAA and still have a really good, high level of visual design impact and stuff. And it was a really great and interesting design challenge to go through and stuff, and a learning experience for everybody, including us and Access Living.
And AAA is the hardest level to reach. It's
Right.
extremely difficult. We usually aim for level A or double A. AAA is amazing. If you can get there, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was tough, and we definitely saw some challenges for sure.
So cool.
Okay, so I
sorry.
think we mentioned this earlier a little bit about measuring success.
No, sorry. Can I go back? I have another point on designing for resistance real quick.
Please do.
Just really, I was sort of also thinking the other night about this and how visual or graphic design can really help build community during resistance, right? Like you get a quick like, oh, these are my people. Like I feel a part of this movement. I can be a part of this. Like that is a piece of cohesion. A lot of times when we're thinking about advocacy campaigns or political campaigns, we're thinking about like the language we use and who we're reaching and so on. But that additional element of visual design is so important, I think, and is often shortchanged a little bit and thought about later on. But thinking about that as part of your campaign design can add like that additional element of like, yes, we are in this together. How you talk about your campaign, yes, we're in this together. How you gather people, but then what those visuals look like, I think is really important as well. So,
and I'll just say, yeah, from a corporate perspective, they've co-opted a lot of that, right? So we love like the the corporate gear and the stuff we all wear, including me,
Hmm.
like, we love all that stuff. It's partly because of the brand the hard brand work they've done. So
Hmm.
it goes without say, like branding is so important
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
bringing folks together.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that. Nicole, what are some of the themes and questions we should be thinking about when we're thinking about measuring success in design?
Well, the first one here is most design work is project-based, so outcomes aren't usually achieved when the projects are complete. So how do you how should organizations extend those relationships beyond the initial contract to ensure that, uh, you know, they can actually deliver the ongoing success that we're kind of after?
Yeah.
Who wants to take that one?
Tim, you're the guru on this.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that in our discovery process, we're defining our KPIs, we're defining all of our metrics for success up front. And it is worth noting that, like as I said, most design contracts are for a very specific deliverable. You design a thing, and then you deliver a thing, and that thing is delivered. But that's an output; it's not necessarily an outcome. And that measurement, like KPIs and success metrics, are really driven by what are the outcomes that you look to achieve. And if you're doing it for a nonprofit or an advocacy organization, you want those to align with their theory of change. Like they have a theory of change, and in that theory of change, they have very specific outcomes that that organization is trying to achieve. As a B Corp with impact business models, we have theories of change around sustainability, accessibility, and education. There are very specific outcomes that we want to see within those things. And so, making sure that those conversations are happening throughout the discovery and design and build processes, so that by the time a contract is done, if an organization doesn't have the resources to to set up, maybe a retainer-based contract or something that goes long term so that you can focus on continuous learning and improvement. At the very least, you are able to set up check-ins about, did the thing that I deliver provide the value that it was supposed to for your organization? And we're lucky enough that most of the organizations that we've worked with continue to work with us, so we can continue to update metrics as needed and update performance as needed. But that's usually because we are very explicit upfront with very specific numbers and that kind of stuff around what success looks like and how we're going to measure it. But that is not a thing that happens upon delivery. It's a thing that happens over time. I don't know, Jen, do you want to add to that, having been through this process with us?
Yeah, I think it's so important with all of these projects to remember that this is a process, right?
Mm,
Like we are no longer in an age where it's set it and forget it.
right.
Because we're in this digital age, it's not Don Draper and all of his faults, right? Where you put it in a
Mhm.
magazine and it sat there. So these are ongoing processes, and that's hard for nonprofits to budget for and plan for. But it also is an opportunity, right? Because you can get almost real time feedback through various, um, measurement tools and things as you put your information out there in the digital world, and being able to get some in real time field feedback so you can iterate over time, if something isn't resonating or isn't working. So it's definitely a double-edged sword, but I think that the key there is it's a process. This is always an ongoing
Yeah,
process.
for sure. And yeah, right up front, oftentimes the metrics that you define for success are not the metrics that actually achieve it. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
worth noting that, like, as rigorous as you want to be about it, those things are going to change. And so, figuring that out alongside this idea of continuous learning is really important. You go
Mm-hmm.
through, some tests, and you hypothesize and you say, this is what we think, this is the metric that I need to measure this. And then you go through and you run those tests, and it could be that you're right and it's spot on and you made the goals that you want to make. It also could mean that you're not right, and that you might have to pivot or shift your approach or whatever, and that's okay. That it's perfectly acceptable to say, all right, we tried this. The important thing being that you don't spend a ton of resources on your test, so that you're being as lean as possible in your testing and your hypotheses as you're creating, so that when you measure, it's not a huge it's not a huge hit to the organization, from a measurement perspective and a resources perspective.
Right.
So on
Uh,
that note, I'm going to move to the next slide because Andrew also has some pretty strong thoughts on this topic.
Oh, I mean, I think the big piece here is to think about iteration, right? And like it's really, really important. Don't think about, try not to think about this as one and done, right? Like we have a lot of clients. I love our clients, but very often they'll come to us with like, okay, we've got a project. It's going to be done in 6 months, 8 months, a year, and it's just not the case, right? It's really hard, as Jen noted, to kind of budget over time for nonprofits. They have a certain budget allocated.
Right.
This is a challenge for almost all organizations, but it is never one and done. You have to think about it in an iterative way, and it really is just a change in mindset about digital products. It's one that we kind of have to educate folks about, and just keeping it in mind will just lend you to longer term success. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Anybody else want to add any closing thoughts on that before we go to Q&A?
Yeah, it looks like we have some great questions. So.
All right,
Cool. Okay.
go ahead. Well, then Nicole, take it away.
All right. Yeah, we do have some really good questions, so thank you to the audience for that. So I'm going to start off with this one. We are having issues with our fundraising appeals. We're funder supported, so we have appeals often throughout the year. The design and communication looks great, but the responses are very low. We're thinking the economic issues are at play here. Any tips on how to continue fundraising, design, and communication during this economic uncertainty?
Mhm.
That is a full-on Jen question
Yeah.
first. I've never heard one.
Yeah, so I actually have lots of questions, which obviously I can't have a dialogue with our attendee. I think there may be, yes, economics may be a piece. Individuals are dealing with a lot of economic uncertainty right now. I think some of this may also be like I have done this myself, right? You create something and you think this is the most amazing, it looks great, and you put it out there and it just doesn't resonate, it just doesn't work. And so, try some testing. If you have some donors that you know really well that you're comfortable with, you be like, hey, what do you think about this? I also would say one thing I'm hearing from a lot of organizations is they are kind of pulling back on the number of asks they're making and uh, doing check-ins. Like, how are you doing? Like, are you all okay out there? And building that community so that people, when they do reach a point where they feel comfortable giving, that there's a trust, there's a relationship there built there. So that's just a couple ideas off the top of my head. But I think testing and trying some different things might be really a really strong approach for you. And there's so many points in the process. I've worked through this with some projects with Tim. Your email might work great, but there might be something on your landing page, or there might be another hiccup in the process that people aren't quite able to get through to something is blocking them from hitting that final yes, I want to make a payment button. So
Mhm.
yeah, I also will say I can't see who your name is, but I'm always happy to hop on a quick call and just chat through some ideas. So
For
if you're
sure.
feeling
Yeah.
really stuck, yeah, Tim and Andrew, you might have other thoughts on that as well.
I just want to quickly jump in and like we have talked a lot about a concept known as enshittification during this series, which in its simplest definition is platform decay. The platforms that we're using to make these fundraising appeals and stuff like that are increasingly alienating their customers. They're basically their entire ecosystems, and what the output of that or the outcome of that is that they're not working as well as they used to. They don't help you meet your goals as well as they used to. And so it's also worth noting, like, depending on the channels that you're using in your marketing and and fundraising campaigns, it might be worth looking at whether or not there are alternative channels to consider, other means to consider, because many of the platforms that we use now have been, they have wrung the value out of them for stakeholders or shareholders, excuse me, as much as possible. And that has ultimately led to a decayed experience for those of us on the end user side, as well as anybody who's like a business user. who uses these platforms to run ads or make campaigns or share content or any of that kind of stuff. And so, ultimately that undermines the value of what we can realistically produce.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is like, when it's related, is just think about alternative media. Think about like maybe there's a newsletter that you can help fund. Maybe there's a group that has a newsletter that, you might be able to kind of attach yourself to. Like think about those alternative like media sources that may be able to support you or you support them. It's tough. It is tough.
That's for
Yeah.
sure.
I'll also add, I'll see if I can find the link and plop it in here, but uh, I've partnered a lot with a company called M&R Strategies, and they have an awesome guide that's free on their website. You might have to give your email address, but about effective and ethical creative, and they do a ton of online fundraising with groups, and there are a lot of good examples in there. So I'll see if I can pull up that link, but that might be a useful guide
Awesome.
for you to maybe challenge some thinking or ideas there.
Great, thanks. We've got 8 minutes left, it looks like. Do we have a couple more questions, Nicole?
Yeah. So I will go to this one next. So could you talk about principles and maybe share an example of designing information for distracted audiences, especially to remind nonprofit audiences of core mission while presenting complex information that supporters of the mission, uh, that supports the mission and tells the story that will catalyze action. Thank you, Jennifer. We don't. Anybody can answer that one.
That's a great. I don't have it like I'd say in general what we try to do at Mangrove and what I tried to do when I ran my own design studio for 20 years is to boil down the message and
Yep.
really hone in on what's important for audiences, users, stakeholders. The more you can do that from the get-go, the more conversions you have, the more engagement you have, the more excitement you have. And I just want to go back to that amazing poster, I Am a Man. It is so incredibly powerful because it is so incredibly simple. And if you're able to do that with a partner, like a design partner or a writer, copywriter, like I
Right.
just think simplicity is just the goal. We don't have time to read. We're not reading. We're looking at silly videos all the time. Boiling down that message into something so compelling is so powerful, even today.
I would add on to that, Andrew, and say yes to all of that. And I think it's also important to think about, like, once you grab that person,
Mhm.
not physically, uh, um, people do, if they're engaged in an issue and they're curious about an issue and it's something that's meaningful to them, they will engage in deeper content, right? Like we've seen the explosion of Substack and all that kind of stuff. But you've got to be able to have that hook first, and then why does this matter to me? Why should I be worrying about this right now? And then bring them into, like, sort of slowly into that. For the folks who do want to explore more and learn more, that they will engage in longer content, but you don't lead with that.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, also we talked about this a little bit earlier in that, the design process is a great way to go through to bring down your message to the core component. But organizations have a lot of stakeholders, and nonprofits especially want to make sure that all of their stakeholders are being heard, which means that you get all kinds of different messages from all kinds of different stakeholders. We see it a lot when we're running like homepage redesigns where everybody thinks their message is the most important message to have on the homepage. And so I would just, gently volley back to the organizational side of things and say, make sure that you're reining in, or you're doing a little bit of like filtering within your own stakeholder, within your organization, as part of that process. So that when you start design, you start discovery, you don't, you're not starting with this like super big mess. So you actually have a little bit of clarity around what it is that you're trying to do, and whose message is going to be kind of taking center stage, so to speak. All
That's
right,
a
I
great
think we
question.
probably have time for one more question, Nicole, and then we got to run through the last couple slides.
Yep. So this one is we do design in-house mostly. Can you discuss how to improve capacity and efficiency with in-house design processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is just a sidebar, but I'm noticing that there are more and more coaches out there that are helping both in-house organizations and like small teams to kind of get them to be into those more effective and efficient processes. So I consider hiring a coach, you know, for a couple weeks, couple months, and just seeing having someone independently look at what can be done instead of hiring somebody new or hiring a new creative director or an art director. It'd be more efficient and maybe a more cost efficient way.
There's a great book by Rosenfeld Media, and the name of the author escapes me at the moment, but the name of the book is called The Design Conductors, and it's really about design ops, and it's really specifically addressing this question where it's, you know, you might have heard of web ops or DevOps or some of the kind of more operational processes that organizations have for their engineering teams or even their, you know, FinOps for finance and stuff like that. This book specifically focuses on design ops and who plays the orchestra conductor, so to speak, to make sure that the organization is creating design solutions that are, you know, maybe scalable or that are efficient and that are like making good on the promises that they're offering out there.
It's a great question.
Check out the design conductors. It's a good resource.
Mhm.
I think in these last couple of minutes, go ahead.
Oh, no, just one quick point on that. I also would think about strategically engaging with an outside designer, right? Can they help you? Like, are you at a point where you're feeling, you know, I totally empathize with this feeling of like being in-house and you've been doing the same things and it's kind of hard to get out of a rut a little bit or a groove. And so, you know, you bring in an outside designer to help you rethink maybe some of your frameworks or, you know, help you challenge, whether it's maybe a coach is a way to do that. But it can kind of shake things up a little bit. And then you take that and you're really doing the heavy implementation, but thinking about some of the frameworks that your design is working within and how you can shake that up is sometimes a strategic use to just bring someone in for a short engagement to help your team think through some new ideas.
It's a great idea.
I know we have one more question in here. We won't be able to get to it today, but we are going to be putting some resources together. So it's definitely something we'll take into consideration. And to that end, let's roll on to the last bit of this session. Thank you everybody for joining us. So there's one last thing for the Navigating Chaos series that we put together, and that is that we are going to be taking all of the insights and resources and everything that has been shared through the process of this webinar and releasing a Navigating Chaos communications toolkit. We're going to be putting it on Be the Change, which is the storytelling platform for the B Corp community, and that'll probably be mid to late May. We'll definitely let everybody know who's attended any of the webinars where to find it, what it is, all that kind of thing. So to be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, thanks everybody. Andrew, do you want to tell us a little bit about Mangrove before we head out?
Sure, I'll give you the 10-second piece. I hope everyone, I really enjoyed talking with everybody. If you have any questions, I hope you'll just reach out to me individually. I'm happy to talk to you anytime. And our website is mangrove-web.com. And I also run a weekly Substack called Dear Designer. If you're interested, it's on Substack, Dear Designer. That's it.
Okay, great, thanks. Nicole, I'm going to ask you to tell us where to find Mightybytes. I know you've been doing this to me for the last few webinars.
Sure. So you can find us at mightybytes.com, or you can find mostly Tim, but also me on LinkedIn. That's just our names. I will put those links in chat. We can move on to the next slide.
Great, thanks. Jen, how about Buoy 231?
Yeah, just really quickly, you can find me at buoy231consulting.com or on LinkedIn. Yeah, just look me up and I would love to chat and brainstorm ideas with anybody out there. So I know it's a lot's going on and happy to help.
Awesome. All right, Nicole, you want to take us out?
Sure. Well, thanks everybody so much for joining us today. Again, an extra special thank you to everybody who's been here for all 6 sessions of this webinar series. Thanks so much. And thanks to Jennifer and Tim and Andrew and any of the other panelists who might be joining us today.
Thank you, Nicole.
All right.
Thanks,
That
Nicole.
is it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.